She'd been sitting for him for 6 Sundays. Same chair, same light, same 3 hours in the afternoon when the studio filled with the particular gold of winter sun through tall north-facing windows. She'd become familiar with the sounds of him working, the soft scratch of charcoal, the occasional pause, the gentle sound of paper being lifted and turned. She had learned the rhythm of his attention, long periods of silence, then a flurry of marks, then silence again as he considered what the marks had said and what still needed saying. Jonas didn't look at her the way people usually looked at her. He looked at her the way people look at things they are trying to understand completely, without the noise of expectation or want, just the clear, patient works of truly seeing, and something about being seen so carefully, so attentively without judgment, had done something to her that she couldn't entirely account for, had opened something, or perhaps it simply revealed something that was already open, that had always been open, waiting for someone with the patience to look. She had modeled for other artists before. She knew the grammar of it, the stillness, the professional distance, the particular impersonality of a gaze that sees form rather than person. She'd always been comfortable with it, had in fact preferred it, the arrangement of being present without being required to be known. Jonas's gaze was different. She'd become aware of this difference gradually, as you become aware of temperature, not as a single moment of noticing, but as an accumulating sense that something is not the same as it was before. His gaze was not impersonal. It was personal in the most careful possible way. The way you are personal about something that matters, that you want to understand correctly, that you are afraid of getting wrong. He looked at her as if she were something the world would not forgive him for misrepresenting, as if the work he was doing, the serious, private work of understanding a person on paper, carried with it an obligation of honesty she'd never felt from anyone who was simply looking at her. She had spent 5 Sundays being quietly undone by this. The first Sunday she had noticed it was the 3rd one. She had been sitting in a usual pose, 3/4 profile, hands in her lap, weight settled into the chair in a way she had learned to produce the least fatigue over 3 hours, when she had become aware that his gaze had changed quality, not in any way she could have articulated precisely, more like the difference between sunlight through cloud and sunlight without cloud, the same light arriving differently. She'd filed this observation and continued sitting. The 4th Sunday she had arrived and found him already there, already working sketch, and he had looked up when she came in with an expression that was so briefly, completely unguarded, that she had almost stopped walking. He had composed it quickly. Had, she thought, become aware of it and managed it. But for that one moment, she'd seen something she recognized as her own feeling, wearing his face. The observation joined the file. The fifth Sunday, she had understood that the file had grown too large to continue calling it observations. The file was a conclusion. She'd simply not yet decided what to do with the conclusion. The sixth Sunday, she had come in with the private intention of saying something, not a speech. She was not a person who gave speeches about feelings. Simply something, an acknowledgement, a small gesture toward the conclusion. She had sat in the chair and looked at the designated point on the middle distance and spent the first hour composing and discarding various versions of the something. None of them seemed right. She had moved into the second hour, then the third, and now the session was ending, and she hadn't said anything, and the drawings were laid out on a table, and she was standing beside him, and the designated point on the middle distance was no longer relevant. Falling in love with someone who draws you is a particular thing. She understood his hands through watching them work, the sureness of them, the occasional hesitation, the way they moved differently when something was working versus when it wasn't. She knew his face in concentration. She knew the way he held his breath at the moment, just before committing a line. She had spent 30 hours watching him. He had spent 30 hours watching her. By the sixth Sunday, they both knew what this was. The question was only who would say so first. She thought about what it meant to be drawn, not looked at. Everyone was looked at constantly. The world was full of looking, the relentless, half-attentive looking at people passing through. But drawn, the particular sustained attention of someone who is attempting to understand you, to translate you into marks on paper, to keep something of you that would otherwise pass. She had spent a long time not being kept in that way. She had arranged her life to make herself somewhat unknowable, not from unfriendliness, but from a caution she'd carried for so long. It had started to feel like personality. She had told herself she preferred the privacy of not being too closely observed. She understood now, in the sixth Sunday's winter light, that this had been a small lie she had told herself to make the absence bearable. This Sunday, something had shifted between them in the quality of the was not sure exactly when it had shifted. The air between them had a different weight. His attention, when it rested on her, had a different quality than it had in the first weeks. Less the objective attention of an artist, more the particular attention of someone who has been looking at something for 30 hours and has arrived somewhere beyond mere observation. She sat in her chair and tried to maintain the agreed upon stillness and found it increasingly difficult to remain still when every part of her was aware of him standing 12 feet away, looking at her with that patient, serious, careful gaze. She was aware, in a way she hadn't been before today, of her own face, of what it might be expressing, unguarded, in the long stretches of the pose, of what he might be seeing. She had been modeling for artists for 4 years. In that time, she had developed a relationship with stillness that was almost philosophical, an understanding of it as active rather than passive, as a form of attention rather than an absence of movement. True stillness, she had found, was not the absence of feeling, but the decision not to act on it. The feeling was still there. It was always there. Today the feeling was quite specific. She was aware of it in her chest, in the quality of her breathing, in the particular effort required to keep her gaze at its designated point rather than letting it drift to where it wanted to go. She'd sat for him for 6 Sundays. In that time, she had watched him work with the focused attention that sitting required and permitted, the particular freedom to look because you were supposed to be looking, were being paid to be present and still and available to observation. She had looked, and she had learned things about him that she would not have learned any other way. She had learned that he was most sure of himself in the first hour, when the energy of beginning carried the marks forward with conviction. She had learned that the second hour was harder, the place where the easy version of the drawing was finished, and the more honest version had to be found, which required a different kind of courage. She had learned that by the 3rd hour he was working from somewhere very deep and quiet in himself, a place below language and opinion, and that what came from there was always the truest thing. She had been watching him work from that deep, quiet place for the past hour. She understood that whatever he was seeing in his 3rd hour of the 6th Sunday was the most honest version of her that had ever been made. This was either terrifying or the most intimate thing that had ever happened to her. She had decided, sometime in the last 20 minutes, that it was the second of those 2 things. He showed her the drawing at the end of the session. Not any single one. The series. 6 Sundays laid out on the work table. Her own face repeated and varied, each one looking slightly herself than the last. She stood close to the table. He stood close to her. She could feel the warmth of his shoulder without touching it. She looked at the last drawing, the most recent one, the one from today, and saw herself looking back with an expression she had never seen in a mirror and didn't have words for, but recognized immediately as true. She turned toward him. He was already turned toward her. His eyes, serious and warm and full of that same careful attention, dropped briefly to her mouth and came back up to meet hers, and the question was answered before it was asked. He stepped into her space unhurriedly, his hand rising to touch her jaw, with the same studied care he brought to everything he did. Index finger, then thumb, then the whole warm curve of his palm cradling her face as if she were something of tremendous consequence, as if he already knew. She felt his thumb trace the line of her lower lip, just once, barely, and the sensation moved through her like a tuning fork struck against bone, clear and resonant and lasting. He kissed her softly, and she felt him exhale as he did. A long, slow breath released against her mouth, as though he'd been holding it for weeks. She brought her hands up to his chest, feeling the rise of his ribcage under her palms, steady and warm, and kissed him back with the accumulated quiet of 6 Sundays and 30 hours, and every single moment she had spent watching him watch her. It was the most unhurried kiss she had ever experienced, long and soft and certain, with no attempt to rush toward anything beyond itself. His hand at her face moved slowly, tracing her cheekbone, the curve of her ear, the line of her jaw, with the same attention he brought to the charcoal, as if committing her to a different kind of memory. She felt everything she'd been withholding from herself and from others release all at once into the warmth of him. She kissed him back with the full weight of it, with all 30 hours and 6 Sundays, and the particular winter light and the series of drawings that looked, each one, a little more like who she actually was. When it ended, he pressed his forehead to hers. Neither of them spoke. Outside, the winter light was going, turning the studio golden, and then amber, and then the deep blue of dusk. And they stayed like that, still, as if